Hello, everybody. Today I'm going to be explaining to Monty and Luke this book by our friend Roman Gelperin. Sorry if I mispronounced your last name. It's called Addiction, Procrastination, and Laziness, a proactive guide to the psychology of motivation. So these are the 7 chapters in the book. And so I guess the thesis of the book and the new concept to me was this concept of the pleasure unconscious, which operates the what we do, basically, and so it starts with in chapter 1 with 5 examples of people who like have a they want to act a certain way, but then they don't. So, for example, one of the people is a guy who's home from university for winter break, and he has a video game addiction. And so he tells himself like, all right, I'm not gonna play this video game, but then he does nonstop for 6 days. Now, eventually he stops. But this tension of your rational mind telling you that you should be doing something, but then your actions showing otherwise is the tension that this book gets at. It's also in the title, right? It's about procrastination, addiction, laziness, and yeah, and so so I guess just to start, so that's chapter 1. Then in chapter 2, talk about the difference between it's basically a quick starter about how these 5 examples, where these people, they don't want the action themselves, but they want merely the results of the action. So I guess maybe I should dive into the 5 examples quickly. So the first one is so there's the video game guy, right? Then there's also this lady who's a bit overweight and who wants to go to the gym, and she does for the first 2 weeks, but then she loses steam, right? In week number 3, she only goes twice. Week number 4, she only goes once, and then she just stops going, right? That's the second example. The third example, let's see, what were the other examples? There's video game addiction. There's a dude that was smoking cigarettes, right? So he like doesn't want to smoke cigarettes, but he continues to do so. Then let's see, where is the book? Here we go. Oh yeah, and then the 2 other ones are this one guy that's procrastinating on a school assignment. So he so he has an English paper to write, and the deadline is in 2 weeks, and he thinks that it's going to take about 10 hours for him to write it, and so he tells himself that he's going to do it, but then he ends up cramming and doing it in the last 10 hours before the assignment is due. And then the 5th example is somebody who's oversleeping all the time, right? Who just spends like 10, 11 hours in bed and does like I guess what they're supposed to do, like work wise, but doesn't do much else, right? Anyway, so these are the 5 examples that were that he gives us. So chapter 2 talks about the difference between these people wanting the action wanting not the action itself, but merely the results. That's more of an introduction. Then chapter 3 talks about the psychological nature of motivation. So here, and so this is where pleasure is first introduced in the book, where I guess the thesis of this chapter is that the reason why we do what we do is based on either increasing pleasure or decreasing displeasure. And this is juxtaposed to just a little footnote to the behaviorist view of psychology, and this is is in the same realm as Freud's like pleasure principle. Then chapter 4 talks about how the pleasure unconscious operates. And so how so for example, there's the displeasure motivation versus pleasure motivation, as well as other like mini essays such as like pleasure from different sources, pleasure is relative, pleasure in activities, pleasurable emotions, and the social factor. And so here, I guess one of the noteworthy ideas that I've also heard in a Huberman podcast is that pleasure is entirely subjective, right? So it's so for example, actually no, I'm gonna talk about that example during chapters 6. So then in chapter 5, he quickly talks about the mental framework of motivation. The key here is the 3 parts of a prospective activity. One is starting the task, and the second is the task itself, and then the third is the consequences of the task. Then chapter 6 talks about the strategies and the toolbox of so this is in my opinion the most this is the most practical chapter. I think that if we go up here, chapter 3, 4, and 5 describe the pleasure unconscious framework, and then chapter 6 talks about like the practical aspects of what's the word of like this isn't the correct word, but like gaming the pleasure unconscious. What does that mean? So, and this goes back to this note that that pleasure is completely malleable, right? And how the way that I think about it is that we have like a baseline of pleasure, right? And what we so imagine like an X and Y chart, right? And on the x-axis, it goes from 0 to 100, and the baseline is 50, okay? And so 100 would be like an extremely pleasurable activity, while 0 would be a lot of pain, right? And so through our pleasure unconscious, let's say that we wake up, right? It's the morning, and we're at 50, we're at baseline. And how what motivates you to do the next thing that you do in your day is relative to if the baseline of pleasure is going up or down, right? So for example, let's say that you wake up and the first thing you do in the morning is you eat some French toast, right? It tastes delicious, and you listen to your favorite podcast, right? So the combination, so let's say you wake up, it's 8 a.m., right? By 8:30, you're in the kitchen, you're eating your French toast, and you're listening to your favorite podcast. Then, if you go back to our X and Y chart, the Y variable is going to go up from 50 to, let's say, 80, right? And so then transitioning from French toast and podcast to this essay you have to write is going to be difficult, right? Because let's just say that for this essay the Y value is like 20, right? So you're at baseline 50, then you go up to 80 with French toast and podcast, and then you're told you should do the essay, which means you should go down to 20, right? Thing is we don't want to go down to 20, right? We know that we should work on this essay, but like, come on, man, it's like minus 50 points. This is not, or minus 60, whatever. Yeah. So that's yeah. So that's just one example of the strategies in our toolbox, right? Where I guess one of them is, where is it? Begin the day with low pleasures, right? Whereas in so if so let's just say you wake up, right? The Y value in your like pleasure chart is at 50. It's baseline, and so I guess a good way to to actually like do what you want to do is to start off your day without spiking your like your pleasure graph, right? Because if you're at 50, going to like 20 to write in the essay is going to be easier than going from 80 to 20. Yeah. So anyways, this is and then there are other like strategies in the toolbox. So I guess the first one here would be the displeasure of a guilty conscience. So you know you should write the essay, but you're not writing it, and so I guess concentrating on the guilt that you'll feel for not writing the essay is a method of actually doing what you should be doing. And then I don't know. I'm not going to go into every single strategy. I guess like one of them that's important is keeping the end in mind, the power of habit and association, controlling your environment, employing social motivation. This is one that Monty and I have actually used, where yeah, like working in the same room as somebody else does like give you like a social pressure to like keep on concentrating instead of going taking a walk or something, right? Yeah, then splitting your attention, that's more for like mundane work. So for example, if you need to do something like wash the dishes that you don't really want to do, but it also doesn't, it's not like writing an essay, you don't need to put your full attention towards doing it. So you listen to music while doing the dishes, right? Yep.
That's the one I use a lot.
And
with audiobooks.
So that's chapter 6, strategies in our toolbox, and then chapter 7 is applying these tools to the 5 people in chapter 1.
Excuse me, Nicholas.
Yep.
Would you touch on caffeine a bit? I have a caffeine addiction, so
yeah,
as a strategy in the toolbox.
Oh yeah. So here he mentions that I guess so in chapter 6 in all of the tools, one of them is drugs. And the two drugs that he talks about is caffeine and nicotine, and how I guess how the kid that doesn't want to write the essay, he might not want to. However, the the taste of a good cup of coffee, if he associates that taste with working, as well as the caffeine, it does like keep you up. That is a way to actually do the work. So it's not really answering your question.
So he uses it as like a self-conditioning tool where you condition yourself to get work done.
Yeah.
And then you can reintroduce the stimuli to make that association again.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. Kind of a behavioral strategy.
And yeah, so so really I guess the big thing that I got out of this book was the framework of the pleasure unconscious, right? Especially because a lot of the psychology books that they really I don't know how to say this. Like a nonfiction psychology book just explains an intuition that you already have about the world is very useful, right? Because I already like had this intuition, but then having like 110 pages about this specific intuition, I found very valuable. As well as like not like spiking your pleasure like before or after doing work. Like that just seems like a good idea. And so having the pleasure unconscious framework, as well as specifically, and he doesn't talk about this in the book, but like the the X and Y graph where like the Y is the quantity of pleasure. I guess the X would be the time, right? And you start at 50, and you don't want to keep it get it super high, because then it's going to be harder to do the yeah, the regular work. One thing that I do is I have little like mini meditation sessions after so if I'm taking a break from my work, and during this leisure time, I've noticed that I've like stacked some pleasure. For example, walking and listening to music. So I like walking, I like listening to music, doing both those things at the same time. It's a lot of pleasure, right? And generally, I'll just like stop listening to music and just walk home, right? But then switching from the walk to work is tough, and so taking a little mini meditation session does the way that I see it is that it like it calibrates my pleasure unconscious to the long term good rather than the short term good. Um, anyways, yeah. So this is me. It's been talking for like 15 minutes now. Um, and yeah, and the purpose of this video is to explain this book to Monty and Luke. So guys, um, any comments, any questions? Also, yeah, big shout out to Roman. Yeah, I like his book.
Shout out Roman.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah, I think I was just gonna say that was pretty. I feel like I understand the book pretty well, the synopsis. So that was very good job at that, Nicholas. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Might have to read it myself now. That's all I have for the moment. Sorry, you wanted to.
When he says how to, so that you can, what came to mind when you went through that is you can game your psychology, whereas you use the unconscious pleasure motivation, just to kind of continuously hit that pleasure button, as in you stack the walk with music, to then follow up with caffeine that you just use to then play video games, and that's one way to game your psychology pleasure principle. But you can also kind of game it to be in service to you and in service to your meaningful goals in life. And just for some vocabulary, I like to use the term from linear algebra called mapping. So it's like you map the signaling of this pleasure to what it is you want to achieve. And these tools look like excellent mapping tools. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, so one of the ideas that I've been thinking about a fair amount for the past 2 weeks or so is exactly like gaming the where I attain pleasure from in my life, where the I guess the goal would be, because I know what are the activities that I should be doing for the long-term good. It's like what's like the opposite of cheap hedonism. So like thoughtful hedonism in a way. The issue is that the cheap hedonism is I mean, yeah, it's cheaper, it's quicker, right? And like the ability to like lower the overall baseline of pleasure and mapping the long-term goals to, I guess, the big pleasures of the day would overall be good, right? Yeah. Did I explain that well?
Yeah, and I think the first thing is that I think Monty, the bio guy, can maybe help me out here. I might not have it perfectly correct, but the brain tends to be very good at taking shortcuts for many different things. Epistemic shortcuts, pleasure shortcuts, where you do the cheap hedonism to kind of satiate the pleasure unconscious, or just satiate your brain in that way. And yeah, especially in modern day, there's just an abundance of those shortcuts. So I think it's something to point out that 100 years ago would have been different, but now this
yeah, the pleasure shortcuts sell.
Yeah,
there's a lot of profit associated with
yeah,
that.
so what are they going to do when they sell? Well, people are going to sell them. So yeah, I just wanted to point out that I didn't live 100 years ago, but I think kids our age and people our age, young adults, early 20s, graduating college soon, even some high school kids maybe, right? They're kind of thrown all this stuff, all this pleasure stuff, and maybe even some pain stuff. And it's very difficult to like Nicholas mentioned, kind of veer, kind of weave around them to go for the long-term pleasure, which is always infinitely better in the long run.
Yeah.
And I can attest to that. I think Nicholas might be able to as well. Maybe even you, Monty. I mean,
yeah, like TikTok would be an example of this, right? Right,
Yeah.
where so our phone gives us pleasure, especially, but think of in the realm of social media sites. Like 10, 12 years ago, when there was Facebook, right? That was like the thing. Talk, like, I don't know, learning about like your friend's trip, right? That was like interesting, somewhat pleasurable as well. But then, like 10 years later, a few years ago, like TikTok comes around, and that just or you know what? I think maybe it would be better to compare YouTube and TikTok, where YouTube has been around for a while. They have like longer form videos, right? And then TikTok is an innovation, that everybody's like, people like a lot, and that they're the pleasure, like
Hijacker.
yeah, or more like the ball of pleasure is just like quicker, right? Like you get more pleasure from a shorter amount of time watching TikTok than watching a longer form video. And how in this way, the market economy is against the
long form.
the
long form gets like drowned out.
Yeah, the long term good rather than the short term good. One interesting idea that I didn't know, that if I had to ask Roman a question, it would be how he defines unconsciousness, right? So I wrote this little, just a few thoughts, and yeah, and
should I give him a call?
Yeah, sure. Well,
it might work, might not.
Okay. Wait, let me say it real quick first.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I would define consciousness as an agent who's aware of their existence, right? So I would say that some animals are conscious, right? Because they're aware that they're an agent in this world, and they also have a use of memory, right? Where they can learn about from the past, and and even think about the future, right? Maybe animals do this, right? They don't have the language to really think about it in a way that isn't just based off instincts, but they do have a memory and think about the future in a very elementary level, right? Because the big thing that makes us different is that we have this language that enables us to just think much more complex thoughts, right? Anyways, so that's how I would define consciousness, right? And I'm not really sure how to define unconsciousness. One way through the pleasure unconscious, one way that I would define unconsciousness, at least this was just the intuition, was to define it consequentially, where consciousness is a state of being, but unconsciousness is your unconsciousness is the thing that leads you to your actions, right? So for example, with the dude that's playing that's not writing his essay, right? His rational mind is telling him to write the essay, but what is actually happening is he's not doing it. He's going to procrastinate until 10 hours before it's due. And so here the definition of unconsciousness would be the actions of him not writing the essay and instead doing other things. So that's my attempt to define unconsciousness. Yeah. Does that question make sense? You guys?
It does.
Mm-hmm.
Shall I give him a call and see if he can help clarify conscious versus unconscious?
So yeah, for the background, Roman is Monty's friend, and we got the chance to meet Roman, me and Nikolai here. What was it? 2 days ago.
Yeah.
And yeah.
The book you have is even a signed copy.
That's right. He's got the signed copy.
Signed copy. Doing big things.
Yeah. So it was really cool to listen to Roman's perspective, not necessarily on this book a lot, but just about what his thoughts were on.
Yeah.
Different, various different things.
Yeah, we met Roman. So today's Wednesday. We met Roman Monday night, and then I read the book yesterday, most of it, and I finished it up today. And yeah.
Okay, so it appears Roman is busy. How would you phrase the question? Maybe I can ask him to look it up and answer in the comments.
Yeah. So how to define the unconscious, right? So I guess the definition, at least my definition of consciousness would be an agent's awareness of its existence in the environment, right? And that means that they have a memory of the past, and as well as maybe thinking about the future, right? So consciousness is an agent's awareness, and then a memory, like they know about time, right? Because like if you don't have memory, then you don't know time, right?
So they can like differentiate different behaviors and the consequences across time.
Yes, and
always think consequentially.
And, and so then with unconsciousness, like how would you define unconsciousness? And and so I guess my thing, as I've repeated, is to describe unconsciousness consequentially. Yeah.
What do you think about Luke and I each taking a stab at that question?
Go at it.
Would you start, Luke?
1 second.
Yeah. Can you phrase it one more time for me?
Yeah. So how would you define unconsciousness?
Right.
Specifically, when you're thinking about this framework of motivation, called the pleasure unconscious.
Right. Man. Okay. So how would I define that? How would I define unconscious? The unconscious. So, you mentioned Freud. I've looked a little bit into his stuff and some other psychoanalysis stuff, and I don't think this would be my full definition, but I think it plays into part as things that you do have a memory of, but it could be from a long time ago, like your childhood, and that thing has an effect on you. For instance, if you got whipped with like a yellow belt or something as a kid, you got beat with that, and then when you're 20, you see a yellow belt, and it invokes or it induces the conscious part of your brain kind of pulling out that yellow belt from and maybe you've never thought of it until that moment in 15 years. So I guess I would say right now that unconscious is probably linked to that. And then with pleasure it would be like, for me, I ate a sugar load of sugar as a kid, and so now I always yearn for sugar, and I as you do the separation with the rational part of your mind, the reasonable part of your mind that can reason and say, well, I probably shouldn't have sugar here at 10 o'clock because it's all around pretty bad for my physical health. It's going to keep me awake, not be able to sleep because of a sugar rush or this, that, and the other. But you still kind of lean toward it and say, well, maybe, and for me, actually, I kind of rationalize it sometimes. I'm like, I know it's bad, but I get the feeling, and it gets pulled out from, in this case, it would be pleasure. In the belt case, it would have been like a pain kind of thing in your unconscious. But I do think memory has a lot to do with it, I'll say. I think that could wrap it up for me. I think the memories that you have, every experience you've gone through, I actually do think has an effect on the unconscious. The experience, and then the memory you take, and the outlook you take from that experience will kind of, because you can't always consciously be thinking about every single thing you experience, and yet you've still experienced all those things. And the brain is a very tricky thing.
Yeah.
So
I guess one way of defining the unconscious is just is blank that's not in consciousness, right? So
would be nonverbal.
I wouldn't really call them memories, but just like the sensory input in the past that has made a mark but isn't in your conscious like repertoire of memories or values.
In terms of neurons, it could just be like a neural connection that is in your brain, but doesn't necessarily have to be a memory. Yeah, but it could get pulled out because it is a connection that is formed and is there somewhere.
Monty, what is non-consciousness? A response must be less than 2 minutes long.
Okay. So
let him lose.
There's a few different properties that come to mind to just kind of throw out there, and then after they're out there in active thought, you can kind of synthesize them into a more cohesive definition. The first property that comes to mind is unconscious versus conscious. There tends to be a verbalization difference. Usually, sometimes you can be conscious in a visual sense, and there are some visual thinkers who don't actually discretize their thoughts in language much, but discretize it better in images. But I guess what I'm really trying to get at is there's an analog versus digital component, where digital means it's discretized in either.
Yeah, what do you mean analog versus digital?
Yeah, so that comes from like electrical engineering and electronics and signal processing. But I use it despite it maybe not being accessible to many people, because it has a very good mapping to what I believe is going on here.
So analog signals have continuous electrical signals, while digital signals have non-continuous electrical signals.
Basically, so for the meaning of for a word, that would be a digital signal because we discretize it in a finite length.
Yeah. Okay. So in this sentence, there's 3 words in this sentence, right?
Yeah.
And so how there's that would be 1, 2, 3, right? Whereas with analog, that would be for the visual thinker, right? Where imagine a bench.
And
or it'd be the pleasure spiking is an analog signal itself.
And you're actually hearing those words through sound waves with your ears in an analog way.
And then they get converted to digital.
And then he converts them into what those words mean. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you want to try to map all this onto signal processing, you can. That's a fun deep dive to do. And I'd say that's one of the core differentiations between conscious and unconscious is the this underlying signal mechanism that's going on.
Which one would be which?
The unconscious would be primarily dealing with analog signals. The conscious is usually performing computation in the digital domain. And there are trade-offs here. With the unconscious, it's usually very expedient. However, the decisions that get produced relative to conscious behavior tend to be there's a wide range of decisions that can be generated from, say, following pleasure or fear or anxiety or any one of the things we categorize as emotions that are just basically processing of the analog signaling.
Okay.
However, when we translate that into a goal structure, that's more like the conscious, and then we have precise goals and a little checklist.
Okay.
So.
Okay, so that's one distinction.
Yeah.
For what is the unconsciousness? What is okay.
Another one?
Yeah.
So there's the precision component. Then there's also the expediency component, which I think you actually touched on earlier. But you can make unconscious decisions much quicker compared to conscious decisions, which comes invaluable in terms of the consequences of just coordinating and adapting to the world.
Yeah. So for example, when I brush my teeth, I don't think about it, right? Or even when I drive, I don't. It's more of
especially driving.
It's somewhat unconscious
because you're driving unconscious.
Yeah,
You're open
that's interesting. Yeah.
the component of expediency, being able to make the quick turns,
Yeah.
that is actually much more adaptive than consciously thinking about, is my signal on? Am I turning right this second? So when a behavior is much more adaptive, when it is expedient, that's when it tends to show up more in the unconscious.
And that's why this guy drives like a grandma, because he drives digital connotation.
Yeah, I have a problem where I'm like I try to be hyper conscious all the time, and I try to make my conscious processing and digital processing of the world quicker, so I don't lose out on the precision. But that makes me kind of slow.
So there's one definition of Google,
Yeah,
super
pretty-
cheap and not interesting at all, which is the part of the mind which is inaccessible to the conscious mind, but which affects behavior and emotions.
Yeah, that's just propaganda by
No,
the Matrix.
I was gonna say that's
Wait, what do you mean? That sounds pretty good though, no?
Yeah. It's I want to say it's cheap,
inaccessible until it isn't.
but
Well, it's
it
analog.
is. However, it does make
But
sense.
what brings it out of the unconscious? So might be the question though.
Well, but however, it does fit in this like the pleasure unconscious framework,
It does.
right?
Right.
Like it does like fit.
Right.
Awesome. Thank you for reflecting that with the two of us.
Let's read a Wikipedia page.
Would you know any books on psychoanalysis and Sigmund Freud?
I do not know.
You sure? Or any books?
End the video. Goodbye.
Don't say it.
It'll say it. We're gonna jump you if you say it. Right.
Yes.
All right. Yeah. We're gonna.
This is not the time for that.
I saw Frederick, and I thought Friedrich Nietzsche, but another German philosopher.
All right. Anyways,
Nietzsche was a coward.
He was a troll.
He was a coward.
All right. Let's end this video. Anyways, this is the pleasure unconscious. This is the book. What's the name of the book? I'm sorry. Addiction, Procrastination, and Laziness
Yeah.
by our friend Roman Gelperin. Sorry. Something. Yeah. Prin.
Shout out Roman.
And yeah. And I guess to end it though, this concept of the pleasure unconscious was what I'm gonna remember out of this book. The strategies are cool too. Yeah. Any final words, guys?
Cool. Just thank you, Roman. I enjoyed the tools in the toolbox.
Yeah.
I'm going to continue trying to use them, and the new ones as well, to try to map out my pleasure to serve me and the world. So you guys should try that too.
Yeah. Thank you, Roman. Hopefully, I think Nicholas, great job on explaining the book. I feel like I
Thank you.
understand it pretty well. Yeah. So, thanks, Roman, and thanks for having us.